Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Baynard, and today we're going to be talking about a lot of Prog. In particular, we're going to be discussing the new records from Haken and Enslaved, which both released on the same day of March 3rd. Haken with Fauna and Enslaved with Heimdal. Both of these artists have been very prominent figures in progressive metal for quite a bit of time now. I would say Enslaved more so than Haken, since they've been around for quite a lot longer, but still. First, let's actually start with Haken. Haken have been, in my opinion, one of the strongest bands in modern progressive metal for the past more than a decade now. Starting off really strong with their really wonderful debut album Aquarius, before continuously experimenting with their sound and expanding on things in very unpredictable and exciting ways over the course of an entire decade, and while still maintaining a very signature sound and personality. While I do think that the quality of their music peaked, no pun intended, with their album The Mountain in 2013, they have since made really strong and badass albums, such as the very bright and bubbly and enthusiastic Affinity, which utilized elements of 80s synth pop, and before following that with the two-part concept album series titled Vector and Virus over the course of 2018 and 2020, respectively, which saw the band going in more heavy, dark, and brutal directions, along with some more somber, melancholic passages. It was basically Haken going in a darker direction than what was typically expected of them at the time, which resulted in some pretty exhilarating records, in my opinion. This latest album from them, Fauna, doesn't really seem to take on a particular direction as much as it kind of feels like some weird amalgamation or culmination of a lot of what they have been doing over the course of their career. A lot of sounds and ideas can be picked apart from various ends of their discography, and all of these sounds come together in a way that still feels, to me at least, really surprisingly cohesive. While Fauna very much feels like an amalgamation of everything that the band has done over the course of the past few years, it still feels like its own beast. Every track feels like it showcases something a little bit different, and everything comes together in a very colorful, diverse, and wildly fun and engaging package. Starting off really strong with the track Taurus, which begins with the types of djenty rhythms and grooves and heavy guitar passages that you would expect from, their past couple of records, combined with a really cool usage of a more verse chorus song structure, for they really know how to build and expand on the same themes in ways that feel consistently interesting throughout the track. For example, the main hook of the song comes back for the third time towards the end under a slightly different groove and time signature, which feels like the band are reiterating on the same theme in a slightly different way. Similar types of things can be said for the track Nightingale, which is a much more lengthy 7.5 minute number that may or may not feel kind of standard for Haken's standards, but regardless, it is still a very strong and entertaining track, irregardless. Tracks, however, such as The Alphabet of Me and Love Bite, go into more accessible, almost top 40 pop types of directions, with these very bright and bubbly and catchy hooks that I think effectively contrast the high level of progressive complexity that the band showcase on these two tracks. In theory, the usage of these very bubblegum top 40 style choruses should suck. That should not work. But because this is Haken, and they have for the longest time been able to combine various different sounds and styles together in a way that feels surprisingly coherent and cohesive, they make this work shockingly well. The track Love Bite especially feels that way to me, for the band. For Ross Jennings very humorously describes it. One second, let me actually pull up the actual description. I love that description so much. Here it is. When the song came out, Ross Jennings described it as, "What better song to put on this fine Valentine's Day 2023 than one about the Black Widow spider mating ritual? This is the Phil Collins inspired upbeat love song at 11/8 with Cannibal Corpse inspired lyrics that you never knew you needed." This track very much plays into the sense of humor that the band have. For even though the song has a very upbeat, energetic, enthusiastic, and uplifting nature that feels kind of reminiscent of something from like Devin Townsend, the lyrics, on the other hand, detail very gruesome kind of imagery of the aforementioned Black Widow spider mating ritual. And this very much plays into the album's concept, which is making each song represent a different type of spirit animal. And this is why I feel like making each song represent a different side of the band works so well, because it all comes together in a way that makes me feel like I'm listening to different movements of a very diverse piece. Beneath the White Rainbow is, what is the song? This is so weird. Lots of very bizarre, kind of cartoony sounding piano melodies and sounds that fill up the track in a very awkward and strange, but also incredibly exhilarating and fun way that feels somewhat reminiscent of something that I would expect from like Between the Buried and Me, or even some of the band's most early works, such as Aquarius. And the track that comes right after that, titled "Island in the Clouds," has a more mellow type of approach that kind of feels reminiscent of Animals as Leaders. And on top of that, we have like a very strange usage of cowbell around like the beginning of the song, and that like just really threw me off guard the first time I heard this song. It just like took me aback and made me laugh out loud, which I think is the type of talent that Haken has, which is to incorporate this sense of humor in a way to the way that they write their music. Speaking of that, speaking of weird, random, crazy ideas that shouldn't work but do, the song Elephants Never Forget is chock full of that for an 11-minute runtime. This song is just, what the fuck am I listening to? Like, the whole thing is filled with weird, funky, crazy, diverse sounds over the course of the entire runtime. But it all also just effectively leads up to a very uplifting, bright, and somewhat emotive finale that reprises the main hook and chorus in a way that feels genuinely quite satisfying and cathartic. After that, the track Eyes of Ebony is a very heartfelt, kind of somber yet still very bittersweet track that is dedicated to Richard Henschel's late father, and also uses the rhinoceros as a metaphor for that, since it is an endangered species. This song, in turn, uses a more mellow approach, even though there are some occasional heavier, kind of Meshuggah-esque riffs here and there. The track overall is very tender and soft and heartfelt, and a very lovely way to end the record. So yeah, overall, I absolutely loved this album so much. Like, Haken are just at the top of their game, creatively, musically, in terms of also performances and production. It is just top-notch progressive metal madness. Now that we've got Haken's Fauna out of the way, let's talk about the new record from Enslaved, titled Heimdal. This record is, in a lot of ways, just as weird as Haken's Fauna, but in a little bit of a different way, in the way that I guess you would expect from Enslaved at this point. Now, just as a brief disclaimer, unlike Haken, I'm actually not quite as familiar with Enslaved's discography, actually. I've known about them for about as long, but I've actually, for whatever reason, never really got the motivation or the time or the chance to dive into their discography all that much until like a few months ago. And even then, I really only had the motivation and the time to check out like 4 or 5 of their albums. The ones that I have checked out are Frost, Beneath the Lights, Axioma Ethica Odini was the name of the album, In Times, E, and their last record, Utgard. So listening to these albums did give me somewhat of a general idea as to what the band's general sound as well as the progression of their sound is like. Personally, Enslaved style in general isn't really quite my thing as much as Haken, mainly because classic 90s black metal has never really been exactly my style. It has never really spoke to me as much as like classic progressive metal. And that very much is what Enslaved are at the root of their sound, even in their more progressive moments. But that being said, I do really like what the fuck. But that being said, I do really like the way that they're able to meld in styles of classic black metal with elements of very strange avant-garde neo-progressive rock as well as some psychedelic elements, and it results in some really well-made, fascinating and enjoyable records such as In Times, E, and I even really enjoyed Utgard, even though I know that not everyone was as crazy about that one. And so naturally, after going through this relative deep dive into their discography, I was pretty pumped for Heimdal, and I think it very much delivered on my expectations. Enslaved's general sound maybe isn't exactly my thing, like as much as say Haken still, but regardless, Heimdal still showed to me a lot of what I admire and appreciate about the band's sound in general. Behind the Mirror begins with some very eerie horns that kind of gives off the Norse Viking flavor of the band that they have always showcased throughout their entire discography. And from there, the song is filled with some wicked riffs and grooves and sounds and vocals. Even if like the harsh vocals aren't entirely my personal style, I guess. The clean vocals throughout this record are really wonderful. They're big, they're soaring, they're very pleasant on the ears. They don't sound too melodramatic. They add a sense of drama, though. And I'm also really loving the track Congelia. Throughout this track, there's some very evil, kind of high register black metal chord progressions and sounds that at first would lead me to believe that I'm listening to some sort of like throwback to Frost era Enslaved. But as the song goes on, it shows that that is not entirely what it is, for the track slowly and surely builds towards a really epic and cathartic and rousing finale in a very cinematic way, making for, I think, probably my favorite track on the record. I also really love the song Forest Dweller. I love the mixture of these very somber acoustic passages and melodies, contrasted with these more upbeat, frantic black metal riffs. And on top of that, there's also a really fun, kind of Emerson Lake and Palmer esque Hammond organ solo. As someone who is like a huge nerd when it comes to like 70s progressive rock, whatever more modern metal bands utilize those sounds, I just get inexplicably happy. Interestingly, the track The Endless Sea is a bit more of a moody and atmospheric and melancholic cut. I love the way that it emphasizes the clean vocals, making for a very kind of immersive number. Around the end of the track, however, it does very interestingly transition into a very strange tempo change before leading up to a kind of weird yet also kind of eerie and ethereal sounding finale with these somewhat atonal vocal harmonies. Songs like Kingdom and Caravans to Another World are very upbeat, a little bit frantic in nature, and the closer Heimdal is an interesting number. I do like it as a closer. Around the first half of the song, there's some very kind of dark, menacing, almost doom metal-esque passages. But towards the end, we have this very elongated ambient interlude that leads to these very upbeat riffs combined with these really interesting vocal harmonies before the song ends with these big, deep, guttural horn sounds that kind of brings the record full circle towards the beginning. I do appreciate it as a closer, and I do really like how it brings itself full circle at the end. But overall, I do think that maybe Enslaved have made more effective and more emotive closers to other albums of the past. Namely, The song Hindsight from E, I think, is a pretty amazing song. But regardless, I do still think that the title track of Heimdal is a really cool way to end the record. So yeah, overall, both Haken and Enslaved both made very fascinating, really fucking great albums. I really enjoyed listening to both of these back to back. They're both very weird and progressive and interesting, but in kind of their own ways. They both have their own types of appeal, and that really makes me, as a prog nerd, really, really happy. And I look forward to hopefully continuing to listening to these two records until like the end of the year when I put together my album of the year list. And so yeah, those are my thoughts on the latest records from Haken and Enslaved. Have you heard either of these albums or one or the other or whatever? If you did you like either of these? And please feel free to discuss your thoughts on these two records as well as what you thought on my personal review of them. And as always, please feel free to like and subscribe and comment and all of that good stuff. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye. Also, stay prog. Okay, I'm gonna end the video now.